After 15 years wed, revenge, my wife left me for her ex and said, "I'll take half." The next day, her sister called me screaming, "OMG, what did you tell her?" This is a story I never thought I'd tell, a raw, uncomfortable truth about betrayal, preparation, and the cold, hard reality of what happens when trust shatters. My wife looked me dead in the eye across that restaurant table and, with an almost casual cruelty, declared she was leaving me for her ex, and, oh, by the way, she was taking half of everything I owned. And the weirdest part? I just nodded, a strange calm washing over me, and told her to pack her stuff that night. That made her pause for maybe 3 seconds before a chilling smile spread across her face, a smile that screamed, "I've won." What Chloe didn't know, what nobody knew except my best friend Liam and my lawyer, was that I'd spent the last 15 years building something she couldn't touch, couldn't break, couldn't even see. The dimly lit Italian restaurant buzzed with the gentle clinking of glasses and hushed conversations, a stark contrast to the sudden, icy silence that had just fallen between us. The air felt heavy, thick with the weight of an unspoken war that had just declared itself, and for the first time in a long time, I felt utterly, terrifyingly prepared. This wasn't some snap decision. This whole journey, this meticulous, almost paranoid preparation, started 7 years before I even met Chloe. I watched my brother, a good guy, a successful engineer, lose everything in a divorce that utterly destroyed him. He married his college sweetheart, and after 10 years, she decided she was done. She took the house, the cars, half his retirement, and stuck him with alimony that basically meant he was working just to fund her new life with her personal trainer. I remember sitting in his tiny apartment that first month after everything finalized. It smelled like old carpet and defeat. He was eating ramen because that's literally all he could afford. And right then, in that moment of crushing defeat, I made myself a promise: I would never, ever be that guy. I'm an accountant. Yeah, I know, sounds boring as hell, right? But it means I see numbers. I see patterns. And more importantly, I see exactly how people get financially gutted when they don't protect themselves. My best friend, Liam, is a forensic accountant, the kind of guy who traces hidden assets in high-stakes divorces and massive fraud cases. Over the years, he'd shown me things that would make your blood run cold. Liam taught me about something he called the invisible cage, a chilling strategy where one spouse structures a marriage so the other person thinks they have access to everything when, legally, they have almost nothing. He showed me case after case where guys thought they were building a life with someone, only to discover they'd been unwittingly funding their wife's affair partner or building their retirement fund. So, when I met Chloe 15 years ago, I was already thinking 3 moves ahead. I know that sounds cold. It sounds like I went into my marriage expecting it to fail. But here's the thing, I didn't expect it to fail. I just refused to be unprepared if it did. Before we got married, I quietly set up an LLC, moved most of my assets into it, and meticulously documented everything I owned before the marriage. And yes, I asked her to sign a prenup. She did it without even reading it, saying she trusted me, loved me, and that money didn't matter to her. I remember feeling a pang of guilt then, thinking maybe I was being paranoid. That guilt, that brief flicker of doubt, vanished entirely 15 years later in that very restaurant. For most of those 15 years, we built what looked like a perfectly normal life. A beautiful house, good careers, we raised our daughter, Ava, who's 19 now and in college. Honestly, for a long time, I actually thought I'd been wrong to protect myself. Chloe seemed happy, committed, like she was in it for the long haul. But about 3 years ago, I started noticing small changes. Nothing dramatic, just little things. Her phone suddenly had a password when it never did before. She needed to work late more often. Girls' nights out seemed to happen every single week. I didn't freak out. I didn't accuse her of anything. I just started paying attention. I hired a private investigator, not because I wanted to catch her doing something wrong, but because I needed to know if my gut was screaming the truth. And it turns out, my gut was absolutely right. She'd been seeing her ex-boyfriend, Noah, for almost 2 years. Meeting him at his apartment, going on work conferences that were actually weekend getaways, the whole cliché situation you read about online. Noah was this guy she dated before me, some wannabe entrepreneur who never actually built anything successful, but always talked about his next big idea. And according to the investigator's report, Chloe had been financially supporting him, which meant she'd been using our joint account to fund her affair. The investigator traced over $80,000 she'd transferred to Noah over those 2 years, in various amounts, sometimes labeled as loans to friends, sometimes gifts for family. But every single dollar went straight to her ex. I didn't confront her. I didn't show my hand. I just quietly activated what Liam and I had started calling the Never Again protocol. This was it. Every protection I'd built over 15 years was coming online all at once. I moved money, locked down accounts, updated the LLC structure, made sure every asset was clearly documented as separate property. My lawyer began drafting documentation of all the transfers to Noah. And I did all of this while still coming home every night, still kissing her goodbye in the morning, still playing the role of the oblivious husband. It felt like living a double life, a silent, chilling war unfolding right under our roof. About 5 years before all this, I'd bought a small apartment building as an investment property through one of my LLCs. Nothing fancy, just 8 units in a decent neighborhood. I didn't pay much attention to the individual tenants because I had a property manager handling everything. But when the investigator gave me Noah's address, I pulled up my property records and almost laughed out loud. Noah had been living in one of my units for years, at a below-market rent that the previous owner had grandfathered in. Chloe had been meeting her affair partner in a building I owned, and she didn't even know it. The irony was almost unbearable. Then came that night at the restaurant, an Italian place she'd picked because, she said, we needed to talk about our future. I already knew what was coming. The investigator had recorded her telling Noah she was finally ready to leave me and cash out. She ordered wine, took a long, dramatic sip, and then said it. She was leaving. She was going back to Noah. And she was taking half of everything. She said it with that smile, like she was telling me about a vacation she'd booked. I looked at her, truly looked at her, and I saw someone I didn't recognize anymore. Someone who'd spent 2 years lying to my face, meticulously planning my financial destruction. And I just said, okay. Pack your stuff and leave tonight. She clearly expected me to beg, to fight, to break down. But I didn't give her any of it. When we got home, she tried to start this big, dramatic scene. Yelling about how she deserved better, how Noah actually appreciated her, how she'd wasted her best years on me. I just sat there on the couch, calm as anything, and told her the door was right there. She left that night, took some clothes and personal stuff. I let her go without saying another word. The moment her car pulled out of the driveway, I called Liam and told him it was time. The protocol was fully active, and everything we'd planned for 15 years was about to pay off in ways Chloe couldn't even imagine. The next morning, I was drinking coffee in my kitchen when my phone started blowing up. The first call was from Chloe's sister, Sarah, who's a lawyer. She came out swinging, with threats about how she was going to destroy me in court, how I'd be paying alimony for the rest of my life, how Chloe deserved everything for putting up with me for 15 years. I just let her talk herself out, then asked one simple question: did Chloe happen to mention the postnuptial agreement we signed 8 years ago? The silence on the other end told me everything. See, about 8 years into our marriage, I'd restructured some business assets and asked Chloe to sign an updated agreement. I told her it was just standard stuff for tax purposes, and she signed it without reading it, just like the prenup. That document basically reinforced every protection I already had in place, while making it crystal clear that certain assets were completely separate. Sarah clearly had no idea this thing existed, which meant Chloe either forgot about it or never thought it mattered. I could practically hear Sarah's brain recalculating through the phone before she hung up without another word. I knew right then that their entire strategy had just collapsed before it even started. 2 days later, Chloe tried to file some emergency motion for temporary support and access to our accounts. But she did it without proper documentation, without proof of need, and without mentioning any of the actual legal agreements we had in place. The judge took about 5 minutes to deny everything and actually started asking questions about whether her lawyer had done proper due diligence. Sarah had to stand there in court, basically admitting she'd filed based on assumptions rather than facts. It was a train wreck. Then came the bank scene, which Liam later told me became legendary among his forensic accounting friends. Chloe apparently walked into our bank with Sarah and demanded access to all our accounts, with this attitude like she owned the place, telling the bank manager she was entitled to half of everything as a spouse. The manager very politely pulled up the account structures, showed her that her name wasn't on most of the accounts, and that the accounts she was on had already been legally frozen pending the divorce proceedings. Then, and this is the part that made Liam actually laugh out loud when he heard about it, the manager pulled out copies of documents Chloe had signed over the years, acknowledging the separate property structure. Chloe just stood there, reading her own signatures, while Sarah's face apparently went from confident to horrified in about 30 seconds. According to the manager, who later gave a deposition, Chloe started yelling that she'd been tricked, that she never understood what she was signing, that this couldn't be legal. Sarah had to basically drag her out of the bank while other customers watched the whole meltdown. Someone even posted about it on a local Facebook group, which made the whole thing even more humiliating for her. But the absolute best part, the thing that still makes me smile when I think about it, happened about a week after Chloe moved out. She and Noah discovered something interesting about his apartment. See, Noah had been living in this decent place in a nice neighborhood for years at below market rent, some kind of sweetheart deal from the previous owner. Chloe moved right in with him, thinking she'd found her safe haven. Neither of them had any idea that I'd bought the building 5 years earlier as an investment property. The moment Chloe moved in, she violated the lease agreement that specifically prohibited long-term guests without landlord approval. My property manager, who knew nothing about my personal situation and was just doing his job, sent them a 30-day notice to vacate for lease violation. Noah apparently lost his mind when he got the notice, threatened to sue, claimed he had rights as a long-term tenant. But his lease was clear, and he'd violated it. When he tried to argue that this was personal retaliation, my lawyer very calmly pointed out that the lease violation was documented, the building had a consistent policy on unauthorized long-term guests, and if he wanted to challenge it, he'd need to prove that every other tenant evicted for the same violation over the past 5 years was also part of some personal vendetta. They were out in 3 weeks. According to neighbors who couldn't resist sharing details online, there was a screaming match in the parking lot when they moved out. Chloe yelling at Noah about how he'd promised to take care of her and now she was basically homeless, and Noah yelling back that none of this was his fault and maybe she should have actually checked her divorce situation before burning down her marriage. The whole thing got posted on TikTok by some teenager in the building and went semi-viral in our area as a cautionary tale about affair karma, which absolutely killed Chloe because she'd always been obsessed with her image, and now she was literally a meme. Around the same time, my daughter, Ava, started doing her own investigation. She'd noticed her mom's behavior had been weird for years, but never said anything. Ava went through Chloe's social media, found posts and pictures that didn't match up with where Chloe said she was, discovered messages and comments that made it clear the affair had been going on way longer than anyone thought. And Ava just went cold on her mom completely. She called me one night and said she'd found evidence that Chloe had been planning this for at least 3 years, that there were posts about deserving better and finding real happiness that predated anything I'd suspected. Ava told me she was done pretending her mom was the victim in all this. That conversation honestly hurt more than anything Chloe had done, because I never wanted Ava to have to choose sides or lose respect for her mother. Chloe tried to do damage control with Ava, sent these long texts about how complicated adult relationships are and how I'd never really loved her properly. But Ava just screenshotted everything and sent it to me with comments about the manipulation tactics she recognized from her psychology classes. At 19 years old, my daughter had become a better judge of character than I'd been at 35. The final explosion came when Chloe showed up at my house unannounced, apparently thinking she still had some right to be there. When I didn't answer the door, because I was actually out, she tried to let herself in with her old key, which obviously didn't work anymore because I changed the locks the day she left. According to my security cameras, she tried to force the door, then started pounding on it and yelling. A neighbor called the cops thinking there was a break-in. When the police showed up, Chloe told them she lived there and I'd locked her out. But the officers checked the property records, saw that the house was owned by my LLC, and that Chloe wasn't listed anywhere as an owner or resident. They basically told her she was trespassing and needed to leave immediately or she'd be arrested. She left, but not before screaming at the cops that this was all illegal and her sister was a lawyer and would handle everything. The officers just looked at each other with that expression cops get when they know they're dealing with someone who's completely delusional about their legal position. One of them actually told me later that they deal with situations like this more often than people think, where someone destroys their marriage and then can't believe there are actual consequences. That night, I got a text from Liam saying that Chloe and Noah had both received legal notices about the lawsuit I was filing. Everything was about to get a whole lot worse for them. I realized we'd moved from defense to offense, and Chloe still had no idea what was coming. The lawsuit against Noah was the nuclear option. When his lawyer saw the filing, he apparently told Noah this wasn't a divorce side effect. This was a calculated financial destruction. We weren't just going after him for the affair. We were hitting him with tortious interference in a marital contract, conspiracy to commit fraud, and unjust enrichment based on the $80,000 Chloe had funneled to him from our joint account over 2 years. Liam had done a full forensic analysis with bank statements, transfer records, and even text messages between Chloe and Noah discussing the money. We could trace every dollar and prove he'd knowingly received marital funds while actively encouraging Chloe to leave the marriage. Noah's lawyer tried to argue that he didn't know the money was coming from marital accounts, but we had text messages where Chloe explicitly told him she was using our joint account. We had photos of them at events where Chloe wore her wedding ring. We had restaurant receipts where they celebrated their anniversary of getting back together. The lawyer finally had to sit Noah down and explain that this wasn't going to court. This was going to settlement, because no jury was going to sympathize with a guy who knowingly helped a married woman steal from her husband while living in that same husband's rental property. The settlement demand was $275,000 plus all legal fees. And Noah absolutely lost it. Claimed he didn't have that kind of money, threatened to countersue for harassment. But his lawyer shot that down real quick and told him that if this went to trial, the amount would probably double, and Noah would be lucky if he wasn't facing criminal charges for conspiracy to commit fraud. While Noah was scrambling, Sarah was having her own nightmare. Every motion she filed got denied. Every argument she made got shot down. The judge in our case started asking pointed questions about whether she properly reviewed the marital agreements before taking on representation. And that's when the State Bar Association got involved with a complaint about her competence. I didn't file the complaint, some other lawyer who'd seen the case documents did it as a professional ethics thing. But once it was filed, Sarah's reputation started crumbling because other lawyers in town were talking about how she'd gone into what looked like a slam-dunk divorce case and somehow ended up with absolutely nothing to show for it except a potential disciplinary hearing. Chloe's life became a public implosion. She couldn't afford to stay anywhere decent because she had no access to money, no job since she'd quit hers months earlier, thinking she was about to get a massive divorce payout. And Noah had kicked her out after the lawsuit hit because he blamed her for bringing legal hell into his life. So, she ended up staying in Sarah's basement, which Sarah absolutely hated, but couldn't refuse because of family obligation. The local gossip about Chloe was relentless. People who'd known us as a couple were sharing stories about seeing her at Target looking completely defeated, buying cheap wine and frozen dinners. Someone even started a Facebook group called Financial Victim Support that was supposedly for people going through difficult divorces. But everyone knew it was really just Chloe trying to find sympathy, and instead getting roasted in the comments by people who'd actually read the public court documents and realized she'd destroyed her own life through her own choices. Ava stopped talking to Chloe completely after Chloe tried to manipulate her one last time with a long letter about how I'd been financially abusive and controlling. Ava just sent back a text that said she'd read all the legal documents, seen all the signatures, and understood that Chloe had signed away her claims willingly over 15 years because she never thought there'd be consequences. That text apparently destroyed Chloe worse than any court ruling, because it meant she'd lost her daughter's respect permanently, and there was no legal maneuver or emotional manipulation that could get it back. The final court hearing was almost anticlimactic. Chloe's position was so weak that even Sarah advised her to accept the divorce terms as offered. Chloe got exactly what the prenup and postnup said she'd get: a small amount of personal property, no spousal support, no claim to any assets acquired before or during the marriage that were properly designated as separate. She walked out of that courtroom with basically nothing except debt and humiliation. Noah ended up settling for the full amount, had to take out loans and sell assets to cover it. The last I heard, he was working 2 jobs, trying to pay everything off, and telling anyone who'd listen that he'd been set up, which nobody believed because the evidence was overwhelming. About 6 months after everything finalized, Chloe tried one last desperate move and called me, asking if we could talk about reconciliation, saying she'd made a mistake, that she understood. Now what she'd lost. I just told her that she didn't lose anything. She threw it away, deliberately, and the only mistake she made was thinking there wouldn't be consequences. Ava ended up changing her major to financial planning with a focus on asset protection, literally inspired by watching how I protected myself. She told me she wanted to help other people avoid the kind of destruction she'd seen relationships cause when people don't protect themselves. Liam threw a small party when everything was finalized, called it the Chronicles of Chloe's Celebration. We sat around with a few close friends talking about how the whole situation had unfolded, and someone made a comment that became my favorite quote from the whole experience. They said that unconditional love shouldn't require unconditional access to your assets. And that's really what it came down to. I didn't divorce Chloe because I didn't love her. I divorced her because she chose to betray 15 years of marriage for a fantasy with her ex, and expected me to fund her exit. And the only reason I came out intact was because I'd learned from my brother's destruction that hope is not a strategy, and trust doesn't mean stupidity. Chloe's living in some small apartment now, working retail from what I hear. Sarah barely practices law anymore after the bar investigation damaged her reputation. And Noah's still paying off his settlement in monthly installments that'll take him years to clear. I kept everything I built, every asset, every investment, every piece of the life I created. And I didn't do it by being cruel or vindictive. I did it by being prepared when everyone else was assuming that love meant leaving yourself vulnerable. And that preparation made all the difference between my story and my brother's story, between financial survival and financial destruction. I'd make the same choices again without hesitation, because protecting yourself isn't about expecting the worst. It's about refusing to be destroyed if the worst happens. What do you guys think? Was I cold for planning so far ahead, or was I justified in protecting myself? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'm reading every single one.